But the first thing I would really like to do is, like Matt, is to thank each and every one of you. Because you wouldn't be sitting in this room listening to this critical event if it weren't for the fact that you chose to sit there and say, I want to make a difference for my nation working here on Capitol Hill, working with veteran service organizations, because you're the ones that really make this nation work. Now, in my case, a little bit different on USS Cole. Let's take a flashback. Young men and women standing out there without sometimes a clue of what they want to do in their lives, so what do? They walk down to the local recruiter, they raise their right hand, they swear an oath to support and defend their nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and they choose what I call a life of consequence. But as a result of choosing that life, we as Americans also assume a degree of obligation to ensure that they're taken care of. Because at some point, whether they serve just 4 years or whether they serve 34 years, they chose to serve their nations. And typically, by the time they finish doing that, there is going to be something somewhere that didn't work the same as it did the day they came in as bright, shiny 18 years old. For a lot of these young men and women, it's here. In my case, we pulled USS Cole in, 3 stopped for fuel, routine. 3 garbage barges were supposed to come out, 2 came out, 3rd boat we thought was the garbage barge, waterborne improvised explosive device with 2 suicide bombers. Came to the middle of the ship, and when it detonated, just to give you an idea of what happened, it blew that 40 by 40 foot hole, killed 17. But in that second, that shock wave traveling through the ship went at 25,000 feet per second. It was instantaneous, and it was over. And in that shock wave, suddenly, we had a number of crew who couldn't figure out what had happened to their hearing. And it was really, for most of those, it was in the days that followed. They came up and said, you know, I'm just, hey doc, I'm hearing this ringing. I can't quite catch everything that's happened. He takes one look and says, you were close to the blast, or you were outside, and you've got ruptured hearing. What we have today is I am in touch with most members of my crew. And virtually anyone that was in the area of the galley in the middle of the ship, the mess decks, or they were outside, suffers hearing loss, anywhere from a VA disability of 10% up to 50%. Unfortunately, as they've gone to the VA and they've asked for help, and they've looked to be able to get the critical care that we as Americans owe them for that terrible sacrifice they paid that morning, they're finding that those waits are 3, 6 months, or even longer. Some of them have even gotten frustrated because I reached out to them in the last few days and said, I just gave up the VA, I walked away, and I decided to do this. What does that really mean? Is that we have a larger obligation than just working to do the VA stuff. We have an obligation to those young men and women who chose that life of consequence to serve, to try and help them, because we want to make it convenient for them. Not just what's convenient for a budget that we work back here in this antiseptic bubble called Washington, D.C., that in many cases people outside from here, and you know it as well as I do, nothing happens that in reality-based thinking happens within 100 miles of Washington. It's not true. There's just a lot that goes into crafting a quality piece of legislation that can have an impact for a long period of time. That's what this legislation does. It reaches out to fix what we have identified as a problem, to take care of these young men and women. And it's each and every one of you who chose, forget the free meal like the congressman said. Part of why you also came here today is because you're working for someone, or you represent someone that truly has an interest, a vested interest, in making sure that those who serve our nation get taken care of, get the care that they need, and are able to do it. If you want a challenge for doing this, here's what I recommend. Go to Home Depot, buy the little bag, stuff those little orange foamies in your ears, and try walking around sometime for about a week with just those stuffed in where you can't quite hear things and everything's muffled and you have to go, what was that? Then you'll get an idea of some of the challenges that they're facing out there when you have hearing loss. So what I would urge you to do, walk away from today and just make that commitment. Make your bosses make that commitment, okay? Nobody owns the nation's defense. Every party commits to it. But when it comes to the health care of our veterans, every single member of Congress should should be on board with this, and I would encourage you to do that. And like Matt said, we are blessed to live, truly, in the greatest nation on the face of the earth. You've chosen to serve in a different capacity than maybe those that raise their right hand in service to the nation, but you are serving our nation. We owe it to those who chose to go out there in harm's way at the tip of the spear. So thank you for what you do. Keep up the great work. Let's get this legislation done. And thank you for the honor and privilege of addressing you today.